welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Started like any other Monday morning. I rolled out of bed, groggy from a late-night binge of some forgettable TV show, and stumbled into the kitchen for coffee. The sound of my coffee maker sputtering to life was the only comfort in the otherwise gray and quiet morning. The news played faintly on my phone, something about an unusual weather pattern over the Midwest. I barely paid attention. Weather talk was just background noise to me. By the time I got dressed and checked my emails, the world had already begun to tilt off its axis. It wasn't obvious at first. A few odd notifications on my phone about network outages, a couple of missed calls from unknown numbers, and an unusually quiet neighborhood. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to one of those weird, off-kilter mornings. Then, at 10:34 a.m., the emergency alert hit. My phone vibrated violently on the counter, the same jarring buzz I'd heard a dozen times before for tornado drills or flash flood warnings. But this one was different. The words weren't about weather or road conditions. They were chillingly direct. Emergency alert. Don't go outside. Remain indoors until further notice. I stared at the screen, my stomach nodding. The alert repeated itself on every device I owned. TV, phone, even the old radio I kept for emergencies. The monotone voice of the automated system was somehow more unsettling than a live announcement would have been. I looked out the window expecting to see, I don't know, something. Maybe military trucks rolling through the streets or a plume of smoke in the distance. Instead, I saw nothing unusual. The sun was high, the streets were still, and the only movement was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. My first thought was some kind of prank. But then, as if the universe wanted to prove me wrong, I noticed the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a lazy day, but an oppressive, unnatural absence of sound. No cars, no birds, no distant hum of lawnmowers or children playing. Just nothing. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend Clara. She was the type who always seemed to know what was going on. Me. Did you see the alert? What the hell is going on? Her response came quickly. Clara, yeah, don't go outside. They're saying it's serious. That didn't help my rising anxiety. Me, serious how? Like a gas leak or something? Clara, I don't know. Just stay inside. I peered out the window again, more carefully this time, as if I expected to catch something in the act of hiding. My eyes scanned the familiar suburban street, now eerily deserted. The Johnsons' minivan was still parked in their driveway. The Smith's dog barked faintly in the distance before abruptly stopping. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow stretching across the sidewalk in an odd, impossible angle. But as I squinted, I realized it wasn't just a shadow. It moved, slowly, deliberately, like it was searching for something. I stumbled back from the window, heart pounding. What the hell was that? The emergency alert blared again, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. Emergency alert. Do not approach doors or windows. Keep all lights off. Remain silent. Panic started to creep in. What kind of situation warranted a directive like that? I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through news apps and social media. But instead of answers, I found chaos. Fragmented posts about people disappearing, cryptic videos showing dark figures darting through the edges of camera frames, and unconfirmed reports of bizarre noises outside homes. One post stuck out: if you see them, don't look directly. They know when you're watching. I didn't know who they were, but the warning sent shivers down my spine. A loud thud shook the front of my house, making me jump. It sounded like someone or something had thrown themselves against the door. My immediate reaction was to run and check, but the alert's warnings echoed in my mind. Instead, I crept to the peephole, my hand trembling as I tried to steady my breath. I couldn't see anything at first, just the empty porch and the faint outline of my neighbor's hedge across the street. But then, as my eyes adjusted to the shadows, I noticed the porch wasn't as empty as I thought. Something crouched just beyond the doorframe, its body unnervingly still. It wasn't human. I could tell that much from the unnatural angles of its limbs and the way its head seemed too large for its thin, wiry frame. And then it moved, a slow, deliberate shift of weight, as if it were testing the air. I stumbled back, biting down a scream. My phone vibrated again, and I snatched it up, praying it wouldn't make a sound. "Clara, don't look outside. They're hunting." I dropped the phone onto the couch, my breathing ragged. Hunting? That wasn't a word you threw around lightly. The sound of scratching at the window made my blood run cold. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, but slow and deliberate, like it wanted me to know it was there. I backed into the kitchen, grabbing the closest thing to a weapon, a heavy cast iron skillet. My mind raced. What were they? Why now? And how long was I supposed to stay locked inside? The emergency alert buzzed again, this time with an addition. Avoid responding to voices outside. They are not who they seem. Voices? I clutched the skillet tighter, dread pooling in my stomach. The scratching stopped, replaced by something worse. A soft knock at the door, and then a voice. "Hey, it's me, Clara. Let me in." My heart nearly stopped. It sounded exactly like her, same cadence, same slight rasp. But I'd just been texting her. How could she be here? The voice called out again, more insistent this time. "Come on, it's not safe out here. Open the door." I froze, torn between fear and logic. If it wasn't her, what was it? "Please," the voice begged. "It's coming back. Let me in." I took a shaky step forward, skillet raised, and then stopped. The emergency alerts warning replayed in my head. Do not respond to voices outside. They are not who they seem. As I stood there, paralyzed, the voice outside shifted. The desperation melted away, replaced by something cold and mocking. "I know you're in there," it whispered, its tone now distorted and inhuman. I backed away, my hands trembling. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Clara. And it wasn't going to stop. The voice outside grew softer, almost playful, as if it knew the sound of it alone would break me. I backed further into the house, gripping the skillet so tightly my knuckles ached. It felt like the only barrier between me and whatever that thing was. The knock stopped. For a moment, silence reclaimed the house, and I dared to hope it had left. Then, faintly, I heard it shuffle across the porch, the wood creaking under its weight. I didn't dare peek. I turned my phone to silent, sat down in the farthest corner of the room, and tried to steady my breathing. My mind raced with questions. What was this thing? Why was it here? And why had the emergency alert been so cryptic? I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the latest updates online. The usual platforms were flooded with posts, but they were fragmented, disjointed, like pieces of a puzzle without edges. One thread caught my eye. A local forum where people from my area were sharing their experiences. Most were terrified and confused, posting about the eerie quiet, strange figures, and most disturbingly, the voices. One user, Tommy_79, had posted something that made my stomach drop. They're fast. They mimic voices to lure you out. Do not open your door. If you hear them, stay quiet. If you see them, don't look too long. Another user replied with a blurry photo of a shadowy figure, barely visible in the glow of a porch light. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. The caption read, "Took this 5 minutes ago. Still there. Help." I shut my phone off. None of this made sense, and staring at blurry photos and panic posts wasn't going to help. My stomach churned with anxiety, but hunger gnawed at me too. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and it felt like hours had passed. I crept into the kitchen, keeping the lights off and moving as quietly as possible. The pantry was still stocked with canned goods, and I grabbed a can of soup, eating it cold straight from the can. It tasted metallic and awful, but it was better than nothing. Halfway through the meal, a new alert buzzed on my phone. My heart leaped into my throat as I read the updated message. Emergency alert. Stay away from doors and windows. Avoid looking outside. Do not engage with the voices. Turn off all lights. Await further instructions. The phrase "turn off all lights" sent a shiver through me. I glanced around the dim room. The only light came from the glow of my phone and the faint sunlight filtering through the curtains. Slowly, I moved to the living room and pulled the curtains shut, plunging the room into near-total darkness. I sat down and tried to think rationally. Maybe this was some government experiment gone wrong, a biological weapon, or some kind of containment breach. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever was outside wasn't human, and it wasn't natural. Suddenly, I heard movement from outside again. This time, it wasn't the shuffle of feet or the creak of the porch. It was a faint, guttural sound, like a low growl mixed with clicking. I froze. The sound grew louder, circling the house slowly, deliberately, as if it was searching for a way in. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered the post from the forum. If you hear them, stay quiet. The noise stopped near the back window. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, a soft tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't knocking like before. It was more delicate, like fingernails lightly brushing the glass. I clenched the skillet tighter and inched toward the window. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I peeked through the edge of the curtain, just enough to see. There it was. The figure stood just outside the window, its long, angular body barely illuminated by the faint light of the moon. Its skin was pale and taut, stretched over a bony frame that seemed too fragile to hold itself up. Its head turned slowly, scanning the area with jerky, insect-like movements. Then it turned toward me. I jerked back, heart hammering in my chest. Had it seen me? Could it even see at all? The tapping stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I waited, counting the seconds, trying to calm my breathing. 10 seconds, 20, 30, nothing. I dared to hope it had left. But then, a voice shattered the quiet. "Hey, it's me. Open up." It was my dad's voice this time. Perfectly clear, perfectly calm. I hadn't seen my dad in years. We weren't exactly on speaking terms, and the idea of him being anywhere near my house was absurd. But for a split second, my mind clung to the sound, desperate to believe it was real. "Come on," the voice said, more insistent now. "I know you're in there." I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. The voice didn't stop. It called out again and again, shifting between familiar tones. My dad, Clara, even my own voice at one point. The creature outside was toying with me, trying to break me. I focused on the emergency alerts instructions. Do not engage. Do not look. The voice faded, and the silence returned. But I didn't feel relief. I felt hunted. As I sat in the dark, clutching the skillet like it was the only thing keeping me alive, I realized something chilling. The entire neighborhood was silent. No one else was moving, no one else was calling for help. Were they all gone? Or were they hiding, like me? The weight of isolation pressed down on me. I had no idea how long this would last or what the endgame was. All I knew was that I couldn't go outside. The emergency alert buzzed again, the noise jarring in the suffocating quiet. This time, the message was even more cryptic. They adapt. Do not trust the familiar. Adapt? My chest tightened as the implications sank in. Whatever these things were, they weren't just hunting, they were learning. I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. And with every passing moment, I felt the walls closing in. When night fell, the silence became unbearable. The usual sounds of the neighborhood, distant car engines, the occasional bark of a dog, even the hum of streetlights were gone. All that remained was the oppressive, deafening quiet. I sat in the living room, the skillet still in my lap, the curtains drawn tight. The only light came from my phone, its battery draining faster than I liked. I thought about turning it off to conserve power, but the idea of losing that last tether to the outside world was too much. I hadn't seen the creature since it disappeared from the window, but I knew it wasn't gone. I could feel it. The emergency alert hadn't changed since the last cryptic update. They adapt. Do not trust the familiar. Adapt. The word haunted me. What did it mean? Were these things getting smarter? Were they learning how to mimic us better? A new sound broke the silence. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach dropped. The tapping was back, this time at the front door. It was soft, deliberate, and impossibly slow, like it wanted to draw me closer. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. Then came the voice. Hey, it's Clara again. Are you okay? It sounded just like her. Warm, familiar, full of concern. But I knew it wasn't her. Couldn't be. Come on, let me in. I'm scared. The voice cracked, like she was on the verge of tears. For a moment, I almost believed it. But then I remembered the warning. Do not trust the familiar. I stayed quiet, gripping the skillet so tightly my fingers ached. The voice shifted, the tone becoming cold and impatient. I know you're in there, it said, the warmth completely gone. The tapping stopped. Silence returned, heavier than before. I tried to calm myself, but my thoughts spiraled. How long could I stay like this? I had enough food and water for a few days, maybe a week if I rationed. But what then? My phone buzzed again, and I nearly dropped it in my lap. The sudden noise felt deafening in the quiet. I grabbed it and saw a text from Clara. Clara, you okay? The timing was unnerving. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Was it really her? Could the creatures mimic text messages too? Me. Are you inside? Her reply came almost instantly. Clara, yeah, at my house. Are you seeing them too? Relief washed over me. If she was inside, she was safe. Me, yeah. One of them was outside my window earlier. What do we do? Clara, don't open the door. Don't look outside. They'll leave eventually. Her response wasn't comforting, but it was something. I kept the conversation going, desperate for a sense of connection. Me, what are they? Clara, I don't know. They're not human. That much I'd already figured out. A loud crash from the back of the house made me jump. I spun around, heart hammering, and stared at the hallway that led to the kitchen. For a long moment, there was nothing, just darkness and silence. And then, a faint scraping sound. It started at the back door, moving slowly along the wall, like something dragging its nails across the surface. I clutched the skillet tighter, forcing myself to stay still. The scraping stopped, replaced by a soft, rhythmic tapping. I crept toward the hallway, each step slow and deliberate. The tapping grew louder as I approached the kitchen, and my heart threatened to burst out of my chest. I peeked around the corner, half expecting to see something monstrous staring back at me. But the kitchen was empty. The tapping continued, coming from the back door. I stepped closer, my bare feet silent against the floor, until I was just a few feet away. The door's small window was covered with a curtain, but I could see a faint shadow shifting on the other side. Hey! A voice called, soft and familiar. It was my dad's voice again. Let me in, it said, calm and patient. I backed away, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. I know you're scared, the voice continued, but it's okay. I'm here now. I'll keep you safe. The words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't him. Couldn't be. I turned and ran back to the living room, slamming the door shut behind me. The tapping stopped, but the quiet was worse. I sat down on the couch, trying to steady my breathing, and stared at my phone. A new emergency alert buzzed across the screen. Do not respond to voices. Avoid looking outside. They are testing your defenses. Testing my defenses? I glanced around the room, my paranoia spiking. Was there more than one? How many were out there? The minutes dragged by like hours. I didn't dare move from the couch, afraid that any sound might draw them closer. Then, somewhere outside, I heard a new noise, a guttural, inhuman growl. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, accompanied by a strange clicking sound, like the chatter of some massive insect. The growling stopped abruptly, replaced by silence. And then the voice came again. "Hey, it's me, Clara." My blood ran cold. I stared at the phone in my lap, where the real Clara's text still sat unanswered. The voice outside repeated itself, more insistent this time. "I know you're in there. Let me in." I pressed my hands over my ears, refusing to listen. "Let me in," it screamed, the words warping into a guttural snarl. I curled into a ball, every instinct screaming at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't move. Eventually, the voice faded and the quiet returned. But I knew better than to think it was over. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to stop. Not until it got inside, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it out. The hours blurred together, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of footsteps or faint tapping on the windows. Every sound, no matter how small, sent a fresh wave of adrenaline through my system. My phone's battery had dwindled to 27%, and I knew I'd have to turn it off soon. I wanted to call Clara, to hear her voice and confirm that she was okay. But every time I thought about it, my stomach churned with doubt. The creatures could mimic voices. Could they mimic an entire conversation? The house felt suffocating, the walls pressing in closer with every passing moment. Sleep was out of the question. I didn't dare let my guard down. But exhaustion was taking its toll. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. A noise jolted me upright. It was faint, barely audible over the silence, but it was there. The sound of something brushing against the house. I held my breath, straining to hear. The noise grew louder, moving from one side of the house to the other. It wasn't random. It was methodical, like someone or something was searching for a way in. Then came the voice. "Hey, it's me, Clara. I brought food." I froze. The voice was muffled, but it was unmistakably hers. "Come on," she said, her tone gentle and reassuring. "I know you're scared, but it's okay now. I'm here." Sounded so real. My heart ached with the desperate hope that it could actually be her. But I knew better. "I brought your favorite," the voice continued. "Pizza and those stupid little breadsticks you love." The familiarity of the details made my skin crawl. How did it know? Were these creatures psychic? Or had it been watching me? The voice grew more insistent. "Open the door, please. I can't stay out here for long." I clenched the skillet, my knuckles white. I wanted to scream at it to go away, but I knew that would only encourage it. The voice fell silent. I stayed frozen, waiting for the next move. The silence stretched on, oppressive and endless, until I began to doubt myself. What if it really was Clara? What if she was in danger because I refused to let her in? The thought gnawed at me, and before I realized what I was doing, I had crept toward the door. My hand hovered over the lock, my mind warring with itself. And then I heard it, the faint clicking sound. It was so quiet I almost missed it, but once I heard it, my blood turned to ice. The clicking was coming from just beyond the door, hidden beneath the sound of Clara's voice. "Please," the voice said again, breaking into a soft sob. "Don't leave me out here." But now I could hear the distortion in it. The slight delay, the way the tone wavered unnaturally. It wasn't Clara. I stumbled back from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The sobs turned into guttural growls, and the clicking grew louder, more frenzied. Then came the pounding. It slammed against the door with a force that rattled the frame, each impact reverberating through the house. "Let me in," it screamed, the voice twisting into something inhuman. I backed into the living room, clutching the skillet like it could somehow save me. The pounding stopped abruptly, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then the voice came again, quieter now, almost playful. "You can't stay in there forever," it said, the tone mocking and sing-song. A chill ran down my spine. The words weren't a plea or a demand. They were a promise. I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The weight of everything crashed over me, and I buried my face in my hands, fighting the urge to break down completely. The emergency alert buzzed on my phone again, and I fumbled to grab it. "They are growing bolder. Trust no one," Avoid all contact. My heart sank. The warnings were becoming more dire, but they didn't offer any solutions. How long could I hold out? I glanced around the darkened room, every shadow suddenly threatening. My mind was fraying at the edges, the constant fear and isolation taking their toll. A noise from the kitchen snapped me out of my spiral. It was subtle, just the faint creak of a floorboard, but it was enough to send me into a panic. I grabbed the skillet and crept toward the hallway, my breath shallow and uneven. The kitchen was dark, the curtains drawn tight, but I could feel something was wrong. "Hello," I whispered, immediately regretting it. Silence. I stepped closer, the skillet raised, every muscle in my body tense. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange energy that made my skin crawl. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the dim light. But as my eyes adjusted, the outline became clearer. It was standing in the corner, its long limbs folded awkwardly, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My breath caught in my throat as it turned toward me, its movements slow and deliberate. Its face, or what I assumed was its face, was smooth and featureless with no eyes or mouth. But somehow, I knew it was staring at me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the skillet. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. I turned and ran, slamming the door shut behind me and barricading it with whatever furniture I could find. My heart felt like it was going to explode, and I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. The emergency alert buzzed again, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. All I could do was sit there, staring at the door, waiting for the next sound, waiting for the next move, and knowing deep down that this was far from over. I stayed pressed against the wall for what felt like hours, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Every creak of the house, every faint gust of wind outside sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. The creature hadn't tried to force its way in, at least not yet, but I knew it was still there. The air in the house felt heavier now, suffocating and oppressive, as though the presence of the creature had altered something fundamental about the space. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and checked the latest emergency alert. They can breach barriers if provoked. Movement attracts them. Remain hidden. The word breach made my stomach churn. I glanced at the flimsy barricade I'd thrown together, a couple of chairs and an old dresser, knowing it wouldn't stand a chance against whatever was out there. I needed to think. First, I checked my resources. The pantry was still stocked with canned goods, and the tap water hadn't stopped running yet. But the thought of staying trapped in the house for days or longer was unbearable. What was the end game? The emergency alerts kept coming, but they offered no solutions, only warnings. How long was I supposed to wait? A sound from outside drew my attention. It wasn't tapping this time. It was a slow, deliberate scraping, like claws dragging across the side of the house. I gripped the skillet, creeping toward the sound despite every instinct screaming at me to stay put. When I reached the living room, I pressed myself against the wall and peeked through a small gap in the curtain. The street outside was bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Shadows stretched long and eerie across the ground, but nothing moved. The scraping sound continued, circling the house. Then I saw it. The creature was crouched low, its elongated limbs moving with unnatural grace. Its smooth, featureless face turned toward the house as though it could see right through the walls. I ducked away from the window, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could hear me. The scraping stopped. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the next sound. But instead of another noise, there was a voice. "Hey, it's me," it said, soft and familiar. This time, it was my own voice. Hearing it sent a cold chill down my spine. It wasn't just mimicking, it was mocking me. "Come on," the voice said, a perfect replica of my tone. "You can't hide forever." I bit down on the urge to scream. The creature was playing a game, testing my defenses, just like the alert had warned. It knew I was here, but it wasn't breaking in. Not yet. I retreated into the bedroom, barricading the door and crouching in the corner with my phone. The screen was down to 15% battery, and I didn't dare plug it into the charger. It would mean turning the power back on, and that was too risky. The forum I checked earlier was still open, and I scrolled through the new posts. The situation was worse than I'd imagined. One user, Hidden Shade, had written, "They're learning fast. Don't make noise. Don't move if you can help it." Someone tried to run earlier, and it followed them for miles before it got them. "These things don't get tired." Another user, Night Watcher, replied with a chilling account. "It broke into my neighbor's house. I heard screaming, then silence. It left after that, but I think it's coming back. My doors are locked, but I don't think it matters. They're just toying with us now." A video post caught my eye. It was grainy and barely lit, but the audio was clear. A desperate man whispering into his phone. "I don't know how much time I have," he said, his voice shaking. "They got inside. I don't know how, but they're here. If anyone's watching this." The video cut off abruptly, the feed dissolving into static. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. These things weren't just hunting, they were exterminating. And the emergency alerts weren't helping. If anything, they seemed more like warnings to stay out of the way than actual survival advice. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. They're not trying to save us. They're just trying to contain the damage. I was on my own. A new alert buzzed on my phone, and I nearly dropped it. The message was short and chilling. "Evacuate if possible. Avoid major roads. They are spreading." The creatures weren't just targeting my neighborhood. They were everywhere. The realization sent a wave of despair crashing over me. I looked around the room, my sanctuary quickly becoming a prison. I couldn't stay here forever. If the creatures didn't get me, starvation or dehydration eventually would. The thought of leaving was terrifying, but staying felt like a death sentence. I needed a plan. The car was parked in the driveway, less than 20 feet from the front door. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. But the creatures were fast, and I'd have to time it perfectly. The emergency alerts warning about avoiding major roads stuck in my mind. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just localized. If I was going to survive, I'd need to avoid people, stick to back roads, and stay out of sight. The creature outside began tapping on the window again, the sound slow and deliberate. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus. It was now or never. I didn't waste another second. If I stayed, I'd be cornered. If I left, at least I had a chance. It wasn't much of a choice, but it was all I had. First, I needed supplies. Moving as quietly as possible, I grabbed a backpack from the closet and stuffed it with essentials. Canned food, a can opener, a flashlight, batteries, and my half-empty water bottle. My phone charger went in last, though I doubted I'd find a place to use it. The skillet was too bulky to carry, so I swapped it for the largest kitchen knife I could find. The cold metal felt foreign and unwieldy in my hand, but it was better than nothing. The tapping at the window stopped as suddenly as it had started. My stomach churned with unease. The creature was still out there. I could feel it, but now it was quiet, watching. I slung the backpack over my shoulders and crept toward the front door. Every step felt impossibly loud in the oppressive silence. Before I opened the door, I peered through the peephole. The street was empty, bathed in the dim glow of the moon. Shadows stretched across the pavement, but there was no sign of the creature. I didn't trust it. I tightened my grip on the knife and took a deep breath. This was it. The door creaked as I opened it, the sound echoing into the night. I froze, listening for any sign of movement. When none came, I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me. The air was cool and thick with an unnatural stillness, like the world was holding its breath. I glanced around, every nerve in my body screaming at me to move, but my legs felt like lead. The car was parked at the edge of the driveway, barely 20 feet away. It might as well have been a mile. I took a step forward, then another, my eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. The silence was unbearable, every sound amplified 100-fold in my ears. Halfway to the car, I heard it, a faint clicking sound, coming from somewhere to my left. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound grew louder, closer, until I could see the source. The creature emerged from the shadows, its long, spindly limbs moving with an unsettling grace. Its smooth, featureless face turned toward me, and I felt the weight of its gaze despite the lack of eyes. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted the last few steps to the car. The creature let out a guttural snarl, and I could hear it closing the distance behind me. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped them. The lock clicked, and I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as the creature reached the car. It hit the window with a sickening thud, its distorted face pressed against the glass. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life as the creature clawed at the window, its movements frantic and unrelenting. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement as I sped down the street. The creature didn't chase me, at least not on foot, but as I turned the corner, I saw it again. It was standing in the middle of the road, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though it had simply teleported there. I swerved, narrowly avoiding it, and kept driving. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The emergency alert buzzed on my phone again, and I risked a quick glance at the screen. Do not stop. They travel faster than you think. The warning sent a fresh wave of terror through me. How fast were they? Could I even outrun them in the car? I pushed the accelerator harder, the engine straining as I sped through the deserted streets. Houses and streetlights blurred past, their darkened windows giving no hint of the horrors hidden inside. The creature appeared again, this time at the edge of a cul-de-sac. It didn't move, didn't chase me. It just stood there, watching. It was toying with me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These things weren't just predators, they were intelligent. They knew how to instill fear, how to manipulate their prey. I needed to think, to plan, but my mind was clouded by panic. The outskirts of town loomed ahead, the streetlights giving way to open fields and dense woods. My plan was simple. Stick to back roads, avoid populated areas, and head for the nearest safe haven, if such a place even existed. But the creatures were everywhere. I saw them in the distance, their elongated forms moving through the fields, their featureless faces turned toward me. They didn't chase the car, but they didn't need to. They were waiting. The road narrowed, the trees closing in on either side, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. I slowed the car, my instincts screaming that this was a trap, but there was no other way forward. Then the car stuttered. No, 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 I whispered, my hands gripping the wheel as the engine sputtered and died. The silence that followed was deafening. I tried the key again, but the car refused to start. Panic set in as I glanced around, the darkness pressing in from all sides. A movement in the rearview mirror caught my eye. The creature was there, standing just a few feet behind the car. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I grabbed the knife and the backpack, throwing the door open and bolting into the woods. Branches scratched at my face and arms as I ran, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The creature's guttural growls echoed behind me, the sound growing louder with every step. I didn't dare look back. All I could do was run, the darkness swallowing me whole as the nightmare closed in. The forest enveloped me like a living, breathing entity, its dense canopy blocking out the faint light of the moon. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves felt alive with menace. The creature's growls echoed behind me, distorted and otherworldly, sending fresh waves of terror coursing through my veins. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were made of lead, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The knife in my hand felt useless against something so unnatural, but it was the only thing grounding me, the only thing that made me feel even remotely capable of surviving. The forest floor was uneven, covered in roots and fallen branches that threatened to trip me with every step. Twice, I stumbled, catching myself on the rough bark of a tree, my palms scraped and bleeding. The creature's guttural clicks grew louder, closer, driving me forward despite the ache in my muscles. I had no idea where I was going. The woods stretched endlessly in all directions, the trees blending together into an impenetrable wall. The car, the road, the town. They were all gone, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The growls stopped suddenly. I skidded to a halt, my breath ragged and my chest heaving. The silence was deafening, more terrifying than the sounds of pursuit. I strained my ears, every instinct screaming that it was still out there, watching, waiting. A low, guttural sound came from somewhere to my right. I whipped around, the knife trembling in my hand. My eyes scanned the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Then I saw it. The creature emerged from the shadows, its elongated limbs moving with a terrifying fluidity. It was crouched low, its featureless face turned directly toward me. Even without eyes, I could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but all I could think was run. The creature tilted its head, the movement jerky and unnatural. Then it lunged. I barely had time to react. I threw myself to the side, the creature's claws raking through the air where I'd been standing a moment before. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Scrambling to my feet, I swung the knife wildly, desperate to keep the creature at bay. It circled me, its movements slow and deliberate, as though it was savoring the hunt. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice cracking. The creature paused, its head tilting again. For a moment, I thought my words had some effect. Then it let out a guttural snarl, and I realized it was laughing. I ran. The creature gave chase, its footsteps impossibly quiet despite its size. I could feel it closing in, the air around me growing colder with every step. I burst into a small clearing, the moonlight revealing a dilapidated cabin at its center. It looked ancient, its walls covered in moss and its roof sagging with age, but it was shelter. I sprinted toward it, throwing open the door and slamming it shut behind me. The cabin was small, barely more than a single room, but it was sturdy. Heavy wooden beams braced the walls, and the door had a thick iron latch. I slid the latch into place, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to secure it. The creature's growls grew louder, circling the cabin like a shark. I pressed my back against the door, gripping the knife so tightly my fingers ached. The growls stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, almost polite. A faint tapping on the door that sent chills down my spine. "Let me in," a voice said, low and distorted. I froze. The voice wasn't mine, but it was familiar. "Come on," it said, its tone cajoling. "It's cold out here." I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to stay silent. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. "Don't be like this," the voice said, frustration creeping into its tone. "You're making it worse for yourself." The door rattled, the iron latch straining against the force. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The creature's voice changed, shifting into a perfect imitation of Clara's. "Please," it said, sobbing. "I'm hurt. I need your help." I shut my eyes, pressing my hands over my ears, but the voice was inescapable. It filled the cabin, surrounding me, penetrating my thoughts. "You can't hide forever," it whispered. "I'll find you." The latch groaned under the pressure, and I knew it wouldn't hold for long. Desperation clawed at me, and I scanned the room for anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy wooden beam propped against the wall. It was crude and splintered, but it would do. The door burst open with a deafening crack, and the creature stepped inside. Its elongated limbs seemed to stretch to fill the room, its featureless face turning toward me with an almost casual malice. I gripped the beam, my body trembling with fear and adrenaline. "This ends now," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. The creature tilted its head, the motion almost curious. Then it lunged. I swung the beam with all my strength, the impact sending a shockwave through my arms. The creature stumbled, its body twisting unnaturally as it let out a guttural screech. But it wasn't enough. The creature recovered almost instantly, its movements faster and more aggressive than before. It swiped at me, its claws slicing through the air, and I barely managed to dodge. I backed toward the far corner of the cabin, my mind racing. I needed a plan, a way out, but the creature was relentless, its attacks leaving me with no time to think. Then I saw it, a small window near the ceiling, just big enough to squeeze through. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. Summoning every ounce of strength, I swung the beam one last time, creating just enough space to make a break for it. I scrambled onto the makeshift table beneath the window, throwing myself through the narrow opening and landing hard on the forest floor outside. The creature roared, its distorted cry echoing through the woods as I stumbled to my feet and ran into the darkness once more. The forest felt alive with menace as I ran, branches clawing at my skin and undergrowth tangling around my ankles. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest, but I couldn't stop. Behind me, the creature's guttural roars tore through the night, closer now than they had any right to be. It was toying with me. I pushed forward, my lungs burning, until I broke into another clearing. This one was larger than the last, the ground strewn with rocks and the charred remnants of a fire pit. The moon hung directly overhead, its pale light illuminating the space. I stumbled to the center, gasping for breath, and spun around to face the edge of the clearing. The creature emerged from the trees moments later, its elongated limbs moving with terrifying precision. Its featureless face turned toward me, and I felt the weight of its gaze, cold and calculating. For a moment, neither of us moved. I gripped the knife tighter, the blade slick with sweat. My body was trembling, exhaustion threatening to overtake me, but I refused to let it show. "Come on," I muttered, my voice low and hoarse. "Let's end this." The creature tilted its head, as if considering my words. Then it lunged. I barely had time to react. I threw myself to the side, the creature's claws raking through the air where I'd been standing. I hit the ground hard, rolling to my feet and slashing wildly with the knife. The blade grazed its arm, black ichor oozing from the wound, but the creature didn't even flinch. It turned on me with a speed that was almost inhuman, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it lunged again. I dodged, but not fast enough. Its claws raked across my arm, a searing pain exploding through my body. I stumbled back, clutching the wound as blood seeped between my fingers. The creature advanced slowly, its movements deliberate, almost mocking. I was out of options, out of time. My eyes darted around the clearing, searching for anything I could use. My gaze landed on the fire pit. The charred remains of wood and ash were still faintly glowing, a remnant of some recent campfire. An idea sparked in my mind. I backed toward the fire pit, keeping my eyes on the creature. When I was close enough, I dropped to one knee and plunged the knife into the embers. The blade hissed and smoked as it heated, glowing faintly red. The creature paused, its head tilting again as if it understood what I was doing. Then it roared, the sound distorted and deafening, and charged. I waited until the last possible second before whipping the blade around. The glowing metal sliced through the air, meeting the creature's outstretched arm. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The creature let out a blood-curdling screech, its arm flailing wildly as the wound sizzled and smoked. It stumbled back, its movements jerky and uncoordinated, black ichor pouring from the injury. I didn't give it time to recover. Gripping the knife with both hands, I lunged forward, driving the blade into its torso. The creature let out another screech, its body convulsing violently as the blade sank deep. It clawed at me, its movements frantic and desperate, but I held firm. "Not this time," I snarled, twisting the knife. The creature let out one final, ear-splitting roar before collapsing to the ground. His body convulsed once, twice, and then went still. For a moment, I didn't move. I stood over the creature, my chest heaving, the knife still embedded in its lifeless form. Then the adrenaline wore off and the pain hit me all at once. My arm throbbed, the wound deep and bleeding heavily. My legs buckled, and I collapsed to the ground beside the creature. The forest was silent now, the oppressive stillness replaced by a strange, almost peaceful quiet. I stared up at the sky, the stars shining brightly overhead. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. The creature was dead, but the fight wasn't over. The emergency alert buzzed on my phone, the sound faint but persistent. I pulled it from my pocket with trembling hands. The screen cracked and smeared with blood. The message was brief, but it sent a chill down my spine. Multiple entities detected. Evacuate immediately. I looked back at the forest, the shadows deep and impenetrable. Somewhere in the darkness, I could hear the faint sound of clicking. They were still out there, and they were coming. I forced myself to my feet, every muscle protesting, and picked up the glowing knife. The fight wasn't over, not yet, but I wasn't going down without a fight. With one last glance at the creature's lifeless body, I turned and disappeared into the forest, the clicking growing louder behind me.